Hi, welcome to the second Player Haters podcast. This is Chris Chase. Yesterday we talked about Jim Zorn and the Washington Redskins, and today, changing it up just a bit for the second podcast. I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm recording this Tuesday. Don't know if I'll post this afternoon or whether I'll try to get some rest that evaded me last night. But I opened the paper this morning, or this afternoon actually, and take it out of the little plastic. And just like I do most days, and I look at the front page of the Washington Post, and I believe my exact phrase was out loud to nobody in particular, "What the fuck is this?" The Washington Post had a massive overhaul, a massive redesign that I guess took place yesterday, but I don't read the paper after the Redskins lose, so I didn't notice it until today. And it is, well, first, let me talk about. I'm probably one of the few people, judging by circulation numbers. There's probably not too many people under 30 who are subscribing to, as Dan Steinberg calls it, the dead tree edition of the Washington Post. To me, I've always loved the paper from when I was in first or second grade, and would spread it out in the table in the morning before school. So I kind of have this like romanticized, just relationship with the paper. And even though I read most of the things online, I'm very nostalgic for the days when newspapers meant something and they really broke news in the print edition. You'd wake up the next morning and read something, and it'd be the first time. It'd be fresh. And I feel that way about Sports Illustrated too. A couple hours ago, when I was home and trying to nap, I was actually going through the SI archives because a link had interested me on the front page of SI.com. And looking through the old SIs, I wondered what it was like in the 70s when you get the baseball preview, and that was really all you'd probably have heard about what was going on in the baseball. I mean, there wasn't ESPN, and I'm sure any local news, you were getting stuff about the local team. So I'm always kind of nostalgic for that day. And I realize it's gone, and newspapers are dying, and they need to figure out a way to stay current. But what the Post did, basically everything other than the masthead has been completely changed. The fonts have changed. The layout of the paper has changed. There's now like double and triple deck headlines. They have kind of like the New York Times does, where they'll have a headline. And my newspaper terms are I'm not really familiar, or I have forgotten them since my journalism class days. But so they'll have a top headline and a second headline. So, for instance, the lead story of the Post today is "Public Option Gains Support." And underneath it, in a smaller font with all caps, "Clear majority now backs plan." And then under that, in italics, "Americans still divided on overall packages." Then the byline, and then the text of the article, which is a different font. And then, there's some cosmetic stuff that's actually not as terrible. On the bottom of the paper, like they have the inside. And they actually quote, for instance, on Tuesday's paper, they quote Tracy Hamilton's column on Jim Zorn. So instead of just saying Tracy Hamilton on Jim Zorn, they actually have a nice quote from her. So that's pretty neat. But other than that, I mean, it's... Oh, okay. And they also... First of all, I thought it was like the Wall Street Journal mixed with the Potomac Gazette, or pick your local newspaper that's, talks about community centers and fire stations and stuff. They also have, for the columnists, they have this, again, Wall Street Journal kind of pixelated thing. But it's not the Wall Street Journal drawings that are so famous. It's like a real picture that somebody put in Photoshop and just did something to. So it kind of looks like Max Headroom back in the 80s. It is kind of bizarre. So, and then on the top deck of the paper, right under the sports, where it says sports, they have a score and then a list of chats that are going on WashingtonPost.com, and then an article inside, and I don't know. So why is this pissing me off so much? I'm a traditionalist, and sometimes too much so. I remember in '94 when the wild card came into baseball, and I was 13 at the time, but I did not like that at all. And of course, since then, I've come to like the wild card. As long as we can accept that baseball now isn't finding the best team, they're finding just who's going to win the World Series, who wins the playoffs. It's a kind of a different... By letting other teams in, it's making it more of a tournament rather than a finding the best team. And that's fine. I was wrong about that. I was also wrong in I reading this today in this section, which I'll get to. The last time a Post had a major redesign was 1998, and that major redesign, there was some different things in the headlines I remember, and the huge thing was that they went to color pictures on the front pages of all the things. And I remember being in journalism class in high school, and we talked about this, and I was one of the only people who didn't like the color, because again, I'm a traditionalist and I like things the way they were. But it didn't take long for me to realize that the color in the paper was a good idea. This, however, I think is a bit different. Those changes I just talked about, the World Series, I mean the wild card and the color pictures, those were changes that made things better. This redesign of the paper seems to be change for the sake of making change. It's very reminiscent of the Redskins. It's almost like we're going to wave our hand over here. Newspapers are dying, so we're going to wave our hand over here to act like, to distract you from the fact that our circulation numbers have dropped whatever percentage they have in the past 10, 15 years. Much like Jim Zorn, which it's stripping him of the play calling duties. I'm not going to get into this again. But there's a connection to be made there. There doesn't seem... so they had a section yesterday, which I went and dug out of my recycling bin, and they explain what the things are, and there's really no good reason for the font changes, and no good reason for the headline changes, other than the fact that they wanted to change them. For instance, they have here, so their explanation for why they have more informative headlines that says, a 3-tier headline identifies the lead story on every display page. A secondary headline is on most articles. Okay, it's not telling us why it's better, it's just telling us what it is. And then some of the other stuff they've done is fine. That's just cosmetic redesigns and better content and making it easier. I understand that, but the font and the layout and the headlines really just are what kind of is riling me up. They talk about the new font, and they say we've switched to a version of Scotch Roman, a sturdy typeface used in newspapers since the early 1800s. And as my buddy Jaffe pointed out to me, we were talking about this afternoon, and he said, changing from this is like Eric Mangini going into the Browns complex and ripping down all the pictures of past Browns history. It's, why are you going to change something that has worked for so long? And again, I'm a traditionalist. I like things the way they were. I wish we could go back to the day when newspapers meant more than they do now. But doing something like this, there doesn't see it. I'm sounding like a broken record with yesterday. There's no reason to do this. And for instance, on the back they have an FAQ section. It says, why make the change to sentence-style headlines? And the answer is, there are a few reasons, including giving us a little more space to write headlines and making them easier to read. Well, those are 2 reasons, not a few, and neither of them are very good. I'd like to say that this is going to change things for me, and it's gone now with just one day they decided to change the whole shebang. Back at the end of last century, which makes you sound old to say, doesn't it? The Post released this paperback book that they sold at grocery stores and bookstores. It was called The Century, and they had for every day of the year they had a front page from a famous year. So, for instance, July 21st, 1969 would be the moon landing front page, and then November 23rd, 63 would be the Kennedy front page, and not all the big stories were in it. Some of the days they had lesser stories, more interesting, kind of quirky things, but the one constant is it always kind of looked the same. From the 30s on, everything looked very similar. And there were slight changes, and especially in the journalism, like the new journalism of the 70s changed, but there was always that constant typeface. It was always the masthead. They always had the same, I don't even know what you call it, underneath the masthead when you have where the date is and what the weather looks like and how much the newspaper costs. That was almost always the same. And now it's, changed. Is it that big a deal? No, it's not that big a deal. I like to say I'm going to put my foot down and stop the paper and cancel it, but I'm not going to do that. It's just one of those things that something that was always one way is now changed, and I don't want to say it makes me sad, because it doesn't make me sad, but it makes me nostalgic. That's right, I said melancholy. So that's actually about 10 minutes. 10 minutes seems to be a nice little rant. I didn't even look at the time until just now, so I think we'll call it a day there, and we'll see when I put this up. And hopefully we'll be back soon with another podcast, and this time probably about Jim Zorn and like 2 or 3 notes before I started. So we'll see. Like I said, it's Tuesday around 6 o'clock now, so maybe I'll post this tonight, maybe tomorrow. And that's it. Hope to be back again soon.